David, if Christians are not confident that their views are true, and when I say they're true, I mean true in the deep sense, true in the way that gravity is true, all right? If they're not convinced that their convictions are true, they will not have the courage to stand up in the line of fire and pay the price that is going to be required more and more. The only thing that's necessary for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. And so as Christians, we can't do nothing. And I know, look, I'm sympathetic to churches who say, well, I don't want to get political. But here's the problem. I mentioned it a moment ago, Dave, that everything's political now.
Hello, everyone. Dr. Dave Moore, and welcome back to the gentempo.com community. And today, I'm especially excited to be talking to Greg Koukl. He's a Christian apologist and author. And as a seminary student who's seeking to learn more about Christ, the Bible, having to gain confidence in the ability to communicate with others, this community is designed to bring as much information so you too have the confidence to share your faith with others. And so that's why I can't think of anyone else who does it as well as you do.
Thank
part
you.
of our docu-series, and
Right.
You had 3 sections of it because there was just so much content right there. Greg Koukl, thanks so much for showing up and being part of the community today.
Well, Dave, it is a great treat for me to hang out with you guys again. I just was so impressed with the work you did and making us all look better than we are on your series there. And so I'm glad to experience that again. Thanks.
You know, we're living in a time that, in this community, like I try to bring as much content to people so they have confidence and to understand the Jesus life, death, resurrection, understanding the Bible is such an important thing for us, but never more important than now. It just seems like there's never been as much fear in the world. People's faith is being challenged. And so I guess before we get into what we were probably going to dig deeper about, what are your thoughts and feelings about what's going on in the world right now, and why is it maybe more difficult or to share our faith than it had been in the past?
Well, my spiritual birthday was 1 week ago yesterday, all right? And I'm 48 years old in Christ now. Almost half a century. I became a Christian as an adult at UCLA, and almost a half a century watching the world. And in one sense, there is no time that's more important or less important for Christianity to be front and center because it's an ultimate issue. It is the ultimate issue. There is no more important question anyone could ask than, does God exist? And if he does, what does he want? And how can I have a relationship with it? Because that determines everything, all right, that follows. All right. So that in a certain sense, there's a given. There's always a heavy need, a critical need for the most ultimate concerns. However, at different periods of time, it's been easier or more difficult to engage those things in a thoughtful way in the public square. Now, America, for 200 years plus, has experienced a tremendous amount of liberty because of our first freedoms that we have to engage in thoughtful ways on very controversial issues, all right? And our idea has been, we're not going to silence people. May the best idea win, that kind of thing. And even if there have been occasions here and there of illicit silencing of people, well, look, those are exceptions, not the rule. We have grown up, you and I, all of the people listening, in an environment, especially if you're over 30, you've grown up in an environment of tremendous amount of freedom to engage these things. But if you've been paying attention, especially since the 60s, and that's when I was a teenager and a young adult, things have progressively changed. And in the last 10 years, even 5 years, the massive amount of change that's happened in the culture has had a significant influence on the freedom that Christians have to speak their mind. And there's an excellent book out, some people may be familiar with it, it's called Live Not by Lies by Rod Dreher, and he talks about the rise of two kinds of totalitarianism. One, a top-down called strong totalitarianism, but another one that's kind of in our culture called a soft totalitarianism. And this is like the Googles and the Microsofts and the Twitters and the Facebooks, and everybody's aware of how they're intervening now to silence dissent. Now, this happens on a political level, but politics and religion are not separate anymore. Everything is political. All moral issues that were the province of religion are now political. And so if you start speaking out in defense of the Christian worldview in a way that bugs somebody in power, and that is largely the left right now, then they're just going to cancel you out. They're going to silence you because they have the ability to do that. This has never happened before in America. Never. And every single day, there's more examples of this kind of thing. I read some more this morning. I won't get into the details. People are familiar with this. But what it means is it's going to require more courage for followers of Christ to stand in the gap with classical Christianity and classical Christian values, because so much of what God cares about now touches on issues that are considered policy matters. They're political. And since the politics have co-opted so much of what Christianity is naturally concerned with, it is not possible to avoid politics and be a faithful Christian. I mean, that's a simple deal. But that also means that the political forces then invade on us and encroach on us and our ability to speak. So, all to say, David, if Christians are not confident that their views are true, and when I say they're true, I mean true in the deep sense, true in the way that gravity is true, all right? If they're not convinced that their convictions are true, they will not have the courage to stand up in the line of fire and pay the price that is going to be required more and more. My prediction, I could be wrong, I hope I am, but I don't think so, because the trend is very strong in one direction. Christians will not have the courage to stand up in the line of fire and take the hits that cultures from the last 2,000 years all around the world have given Christians, and we have been able to dodge that bullet. All right? We can't dodge it anymore. That's why what we're talking about today is so critically important.
I agree, and it seems like it seems, maybe it's me or it's my perspective, but it just seems like all of these things that it just seems like it's so quickly that everything's being canceled. Yeah. You can't talk about this. You can't say that. It's happening so quickly. And I wonder if you feel the same way. It seems like maybe because people were locked down and church services were, canceled or online, but it just seems like we haven't really had much of a response from the Christian world, from the churches. It's almost as if we're waiting for things to go back to normal. Mm-hmm. And I'm getting a sense now that we're in this thing long enough that that's not the case.
That's not going to happen.
We're not going to get to that place where, now that that's gone, we'll go back to what we were doing before. I think it is a time to step up in an environment, in a climate that is a bit hostile, and start speaking the truth, because I think that people have just been silent and waiting as if it's going to go away. And I don't think that's going to happen.
I've watched what's happened in Canada, which is a few steps ahead of us in this whole process. And a pastor, just got arrested just recently. And there's more things like this. So we see this stuff going on in Canada. And what had happened in the past, and I've done a lot of work in Canada and talked to pastors there, trying to encourage them to get involved, but their mentality has been, let's just keep our heads low. Let's not talk about it. Let's not draw attention to ourselves. Let's not cause any ruckus or make any waves, and people won't notice and they'll leave us alone. Well, now we realize this is a failed strategy. This is not going to happen. And the reason is because the totalitarian power, let me back up and put it this way. The left has always had a totalitarian impulse. Okay. And now that impulse is being fed, and it's being abetted by government powers more than ever, and cultural powers, soft totalitarianism and hard totalitarianism. And so, now it's now here in our face in a way that it's never been before. And so, if we are silent, then there's nothing to, how's the saying go? There's something about the only thing that's necessary for evil to prevail is for good people to do nothing. And so as Christians, we can't do nothing. And I know, I'm sympathetic to churches who say, well, I don't want to get political. But here's the problem. I mentioned it a moment ago, Dave, that everything's political now. We used to have marriage. We used to have child rearing. We used to have the sex thing. That was part of the family deal, okay? We used to have all of these things that were provinces of the family and their religious conviction. Now everything's been co-opted by the political realm. So if you're saying, I don't want to be political, all they have to do is co-opt something that belongs to us, call it political, and we have to wave the white flag. And pretty soon we recede more and more and more. And then what are we talking about? We're not talking about anything that matters. All we're talking about is, is Jesus coming back again? When's the rapture? Do you baptize by immersion or by sprinkling? Or what about Calvinism, Arminian? All these parochial private affairs that have almost nothing to do with day-to-day life. And then no wonder people say your religion's not relevant. Mm-hmm. Or Christians walk away because they think, well, this is just a bunch of nitpicking about theological, splitting hairs, and it doesn't address the real life. But the Christian view of reality is meant to address everything. And pastors are meant to feed their flocks with spiritual insight regarding those things that are pressing in on them all around them. And if they make this kind of blanket commitment, I'm not going to be political, then they can't do that. Not today. You cannot feed your people. And they will go somewhere else to get fed. And that might be to the LGBT crowd. It might be to the critical race theory crowd, whatever. But it isn't going to be to their pastor. 200 years ago, it wasn't like that. Mm-hmm. The church was the center of the community. The American Revolution, a justifiable resistance to tyranny, was grounded in the life of the church. That's where these meetings were held. And if you read the Declaration, look at all the religion that's in the Declaration. All right? We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Each is endowed by his creator with certain unalienable rights, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. But that's being alienated from us by you guys. You can't do that. And so we have an obligation to stand against this in some measure. I mean, they have their way. We have our ways. It depends on the intensity of it. I'm not advocating revolution. The point I'm making, though, is it was the Christians who stood up and said, this is wrong. And we are putting ourselves ideologically in the debate in the way of the error, of the untruth, of the abuse. We are standing in the gap. And that's what we need to do, too, in different ways, in different circumstances. But this is what it's coming to, just like Dietrich Bonhoeffer did in his time, and William Wilberforce did in his time, and Harriet Beecher Stowe did in her time, in her way, writing. And there's all different ways that this can be done. But these are all examples of people who had a deep commitment to Christ and a Christian understanding of reality and stood in the gap. And this is what's going to be required more and more of us, in my view.
Absolutely. In my church, we say, let's keep the main things the main thing. Mm-hmm. So we're going to feed the community today. Yeah. We're going to eat some main things. And what I mean by that, and that's just why I'm excited for this conversation, because I can think of no one else that explained this so well. But so let's talk about the Bible. Okay. Let's talk about, I know you wrote a book on this topic, but right, keeping the main things, not, what incense we use or how when do we kneel or pray, we're going to talk about God's narrative story. Right. This piecing together, because some people, the Bible, just random stories put together, no context. No, I just finished biblical narrative too. I'm walking through this narrative and seeing this relationship restored, right, between God and man. So, right. So I love how you summarize it, because you can literally explain the Bible and the story between the vision and the coming together of God and man, the rescue plan. No one does it better than you. So could you just kind of explain to us what's going on here and what should be the forefront of our mind?
And thank you for giving me the opportunity, David, because I did write a book about this. It's called The Story of Reality, and it's been pretty well received. Like any author, I wish more people would read it, but partly because of my goal with it, and it is to give the big picture. And it's similar to what C.S. Lewis did 75 years ago with Mere Christianity. And not a C.S. Lewis, but that need is still there. And so I'm trying to take that general concept and and provide it in an accessible way to the average reader, Christian or non-Christian. You know, you've read it. It doesn't have a lot of Christian lingo in it. It's very accessible to, but the ideas are there. And the point that I'm making is that there's a broad narrative to the Christian story. And there's a certain sense, we talk about apologetics, David, that is, here are the reasons why we believe Jesus rose from the dead, or the Bible's reliable, all these different things, you know, and God exists, etc. But one of the most powerful apologetics, if you will, defenses for Christianity writ broad as a worldview is the worldview itself when you understand it. Because there is a grand story here from the beginning to the end. And this is why the subtitle of the book, The Story of Reality, is How the World Began, How it Ends, and Everything Important that Happens in Between. Because in a certain sense, behind all of the headlines and all of the stuff that grabs our attention, there is a great drama being played out that is the most important detail of history, all right? And a lot of people who think about Christianity don't realize the elegance of the worldview, how it all fits together in a particular way. And this is what I try to do in the book. And I just use 5 simple words, all right, to create a storyline from the beginning to the end. And this represents kind of an outline that then I give some detail on through the book to help people see how it's tied together. So those 5 words are God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection. And here I mean the final resurrection to reward or judgment, although the resurrection of Christ 2,000 years ago is an important feature of that. You know, it secures the final resurrection kind of thing. But God, man, Jesus, cross, resurrection. Those are the most important things that happen in the order they take place. So to sum that up real simply, God is the main character. He created everything else out of nothing else, including man. Number 2, to be in friendship with man. All right. But man got himself, human beings here, got themselves in a heap of trouble, right? Okay. So what did God do? God could have just abandoned everybody, right? He did not have any rescue plan for the angels, but he had a special desire to be in relationship with human beings. And so he initiated a rescue plan. An important point here, Dave, is that in the Christian story of reality, that is their account of how the world really is, human beings can't rescue themselves. They don't, because they can't. Every other story has human beings rescuing themselves. Not this one. They can't rescue them. They need to be rescued. And so what does God do out of love? Is he initiates a rescue plan in which God becomes a human being. He steps down and enters into human history and into the human race. God, man, Jesus. And the way Jesus lives his life and the way he dies on a cross provides for the possibility of answering the problem of evil, which the whole story is about dealing with, and it determines what happens to everybody at the last resurrection and the final thing. So no matter who people are or where they're at or what they believe, what the fact is, they are embedded in this grand drama that it's working its way out through history. And all of these things that we see are part of a drama that where there's players that you can't see. And Paul talks about this in Ephesians 6. You know, our battle's not against flesh and blood, other people. That's not the real battle. This is representing something that's going on in the heavenly places. So this is reality. And the case that I'm making and that we make as Christians is this isn't just a side religion. Try it, see if you like it. Maybe you don't like this flavor. You can be a Buddhist and you like that flavor. We're not talking about flavors here. We're talking about gravity. We're talking about the way the world actually is. And if the story of reality that I just described is in fact the true account of the way the world really is, this has ramifications for every single person on earth at every single moment of history of the human race. And so, I mean, we can go in more detail if you want, but I want people to get that big picture because I think there is a tremendous elegance in the story. It doesn't start with Jesus dropping out of the sky somewhere. No, it starts way back when, in the beginning. All right. And when you see the entire accounting and the particulars, how they fit together, this is a powerful evidence since I think it resonates with our deepest intuitions about the world. It's evidence that it's actually an accurate story. And it's a story that has tremendous hope that's offered to people. And this is why I go into account of Jesus' life and in the book, and Jesus' death and his resurrection. All of these things are part of the story. People wonder, well, the problem of evil, how could there be a God? But our story is all about the problem of evil and about how God deals with it. So we learn how there can be a good God and a problem of evil. It's part of our story, and our story's not over yet. And one way that God dealt with the problem of evil is he provides a provision for forgiveness for the evil people who create the problem, you and me, and everyone else, right? And that's Jesus on the cross. But there'll be a time, final resurrection, he comes back, and he will not be, like the first time, the Lamb of God. When he comes back the next time, he'll be the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And when he takes care of evil, he's going to do a total job. All right. And if you are not under the forgiveness and mercy that God's provide, you will get the only other alternative, not perfect mercy, but perfect justice. And that will not be a pretty picture. And so this time now is an opportunity for perfect mercy to be offered, and people respond to it before the final gavel falls. That's the story of reality in a nutshell, so to speak.
I love that. I mean, it's like you read the Bible, you're 2 chapters in, things are going great, right?
Yeah.
And then
looking good.
And then the fall of man, and then many chapters later, God becomes man, becomes provision, dies for our sins. So now the question is, so if I'm a listener, I'm in this community, I kind of got that. All right, so what does that mean for me? Like that, what does that mean for me today, 2021? What does that mean to me today?
Mm-hmm. Well, I gave a hint just a few moments ago about that, because I talked about this story. If this is the real story, then it has application for every single person on the planet for the entire time that any human being lived on the planet. I mean, this is the big story. When people say, well, what is truth? And what they mean is, well, what is the truth? What is the grand thing? This is it. This is our answer to that question. All right. And so if we're right, and this is where apologetics comes in to give reasons why we think this is the case. And part of what I'm saying is there are a lot of details in here that resonate with our deepest intuitions about the nature of reality. We don't need a Bible to know that, there's a problem, right? Something's wrong with the world. We don't need the Bible to tell us that. We don't need the Bible to tell us there's something wrong with us. We don't need the Bible to tell us we're guilty. We already know that. That's part of the existential condition of man. But what the Bible tells us is that there is a reason why you're guilty, because you do bad things, even the best of us, and there's a solution that God is providing, so that ultimately He'll make a new world where only goodness reigns. But in the meantime, He's making a provision for individual people for forgiveness. So this then takes us, your question, well, what application does this have to me? I'm going to make a qualification here. I think the ruling right now in the United States of America at this point in time, the ruling ethic is simply stated in a slogan: you do you, or me do me. It's utterly narcissistic. What can I do to make me feel better right now? I have a right to make me feel better right now. And if that means having any kind of sex I want right now, then I should be allowed to do that without any restriction or correction or judgment or anything like that. Leave me alone to do it. Okay. All right. Now, there's a reason why the culture is hammering away on that notion. Remember, I talked about the bigger picture, the spiritual battle kind of thing. That's because if you believe that, you're not going to be interested in anything I have to say. Probably. If you believe I just want what I want right now, you're not going to listen to me, because I'm here to tell you it's not about you. It's not your world. You're not the center of things. The world doesn't revolve around you. Now, that's pardon me?
And I'm here to tell you that that's not a new concept. I've read right. Judges. I know, it's right. Like people are like, well, it's 2000 and things are different now, and we just do our own thing. And trust me, they did their own thing back then. It didn't work out well then either.
Book of Judges, every man did what was right in his own eyes. And so that's
God wasn't a big fan.
So if a person is committed to narcissism, and that's the most accurate way to put it, if they're committed to narcissism, you're not going to be interested probably in much that I have to say. All right. But your commitment to narcissism is you're going to be your undoing, because there is a justice and someday you will feel it. That's a fact of reality. All right. And so there are times in people's lives when they start to realize that, gee, if it's all about me, that's a pretty empty life. They get everything, and they have everything, and they're still looking around and they're saying, what's the deal here? And so then they got to numb themselves with drugs and then they kill themselves or something like that. But I'm here to say, when people are starting to feel that, you are feeling something is true about yourself. Something's wrong. And it's not because you're not getting enough money or not fame or all these other things. Those don't do it. Okay. It's something else inside of you that is crying out for love and forgiveness, for unconditional acceptance, for belonging, all of these things, because the fact is you're made in the image of God, and you live in the world that God has made. And so you have these hungers that nothing but God can satisfy, and God has made a provision. So when I speak about the provision then, for those who are in a position to think, yeah, maybe it's not all about me, and I'm really dealing with these other things, yeah, I'm aware of this stuff, maybe he's onto something. Now I'm speaking to a felt need. But what I don't want to do is try to speak to any felt need. This is the distinction I'm making. I'm not going to tell the narcissist, okay, become a Christian and, God will give you what you want. He'll make your life wonderful. You'll feel great all the time. He'll repair your marriage. He'll make you healthy, wealthy, and wise, and all of this stuff. This is not the goal. This is not what's going to happen. Christians are in a world that's at war with them. Okay, if you're in the middle of World War II, you're not going to be preaching healthy, wealthy, and rise. You're in a battle. There's casualties. And so this is true here too. And so when I invite people to consider Christ, I want to make sure that I am not appealing to them to their naked, base self-interest. A lot of Christians do. And by the way, there's a saying, whatever you get one with, you get one to, W-O-N. If you get one with an appeal to self-interest, you're one to that. Then your Christianity is going to be all self-interest. All right? And that isn't what Jesus offers. It's called the kingdom of God. That means God's the king, and we are the dom. We belong to him.
Yep.
And that's in the very first verse of the story. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. A king made a domain. It's his. And then in the second chapter, man to be in friendship with him. In the third chapter, bang, it all goes south because man says, no, I don't want you to be king over me. We're going to do it our own way. And we've been saying that ever since. That's a dead end, approach.
It's a paradox to happiness, the way I see it. And listen, I tried it both ways. I'm 50 years old. I'm in seminary school now. It took me a while to get here. Let's put it that way. Right. And I find it, I guess most people think the ultimate freedom is doing what you want when you want. Like that's free. Right. I'm free. No one's telling me what to do, and I'm going to do what I want. And guess what? That leads to misery. That leads to emptiness. This God-sized void. The ironic thing is, put the Lord God first, right? God said at the beginning. Jesus says it in the Old Testament. Love the Lord your God with your heart, mind, and soul. And that means take you out of the way. Put him first. But my goodness, what freedom! Sure. Love, happiness, like all that you seek to be and feel comes through surrendering. They surrender to win. And it's this paradox that I would love to be able to share with folks. Like that's really where, that's my drive is to, my goodness, I was in misery. I had a life where I thought I was successful. And then there was a shift. And if I could share that with others, and whether it be in this community and have conversations like this, that it's this great paradox of life that requires a bit of, I was about to use the word faith. What do we use? Conviction, right?
Well, it's faith. I don't like the word faith just because it's misunderstood. Yeah. And so I suggest, like the word conviction, if you're talking about the content of your faith. I have convictions about Jesus. If I say I have faith about Jesus, people are hearing you have a leap of faith about Jesus. You have a blind faith about Jesus. It's just what's happened to that word in the last 50 years, okay? Now, so this is why I say I have convictions about Jesus, but when I want people to follow him, I'll use that word, or I'll say, I want you to put your trust in Jesus, because the biblical word translated faith means active trust. And so if we say trust, that's a word that is more accessible to people. It's not polluted. It's not corrupted for our use. So I want people to put their trust in Jesus. And I want them to have convictions that they're confident of about who Jesus is, because there are good reasons to believe that the account of Christ, notice I said account of Christ, I didn't say the Bible, because people subconsciously do the same thing with the Bible, And the Bible's not a book, it's a library of books, all right? It didn't become a book until about the 5th century AD, where they collected it all together in one tome called a codex, all right? But they were still around there, but they were individual books. So we have these accounts, historical accounts of the life of Jesus, and these are reliable accounts on the main, and this is what historians consider them as. Well, if they're reliable on the main, then what do they tell us? What did this man Jesus say and do that radically transformed the entire world? Maybe we should pay attention to that instead of cherry picking a verse here or there to fit in with our own postmodern politics. Instead of making Jesus follow us, why don't we think about following him? And getting back to the text. And this is what we do as Christians, obviously. And we commend this account, the story of reality, to the non-Christians for their consideration as the true story. And if they don't accept it, that's up to them. But, then they've got to embrace another story. For example, atheism. Maybe, I'm an atheist because of the problem of evil. All right, I get it. But I wanted to point out that the atheist has to answer for the problem of evil too, not just the theist. Okay, so you got God out of the picture because you see all this evil in the world. Okay, you tell me, Mr. Atheist, how do you account for all the evil in the world? And how do you solve the problem? Now, we can account for it and solve it. We have both on our worldview. The atheist has neither. Because in atheism, there is no adequate foundation for moral principles, objective moral principles that are violated when people call us evil. And so they can't even make sense of the notion of evil in the world, much less answer it. Can't answer a thing they can't make sense of. So ironically, though people think that the problem of evil, it works against Christianity and for atheism, it's the other way around. We have the explanatory power in our worldview to make sense of this and to solve it, resolve it. It's all right there in the story, and I detail that in the book. The atheists can't do either. And somehow they think they're on the high intellectual ground when they make this challenge against Christianity. It doesn't work that way.
Right. So I guess that leads us to the book that we were mentioning just before we came on, which was Tactics. You wrote a book called Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions. And I think what I would love to see happen with this community as people, digest this content is not just to understand and learn for themselves, but really to have that confidence to share it with the people around them, their friends, their family. You've tackled this situation because people are afraid, they're nervous, or they don't know. So you've actually have a strategy for people to share their faith.
If you don't, I'm going to be a good author here and give a look-see at the book here. Tactics, a game plan for discussing your Christian convictions is the title. This red circle means, or oval means, this is the 10th anniversary edition, so it's the updated one. That's been out for a little more than 2 years, about 2 years, this 10th anniversary edition. And I just checked the other day, 2,500 reviews for the 10th anniversary. On Amazon, the average is 5. 5 out of 5. That's the average for 2,500 people, which I'm not trying to wave my flag. I'm just trying to make the point that this has been helping a lot of people. And I'm not surprised because the concepts in there have really helped me. And from the book, there are lots of different maneuvers in conversations that I teach that people can use to make conversations amicable and friendly, but also legitimately pointed. In other words, hey, how do you help me out with this? How do you deal with this particular problem? And so there are tactics that have names like Taking the Roof Off and Rhodes Scholar and What a Friend We Have in Jesus and Inside Out. These are all different kind of insightful maneuvers into conversations. But there is a tactic that is the core of the game plan. And it's named after a famous TV character, which a lot of people still remember. They just had actually the 50th anniversary of the TV show within the last few weeks. And his name is Lieutenant Columbo. And so you remember this guy, the bumbling guy who comes in really under the radar, looks like he's stupid, and starts scratching his head and mumbling to himself. But he asks a lot of questions. And that's the way he gets the bad guy, the murderer in this case. And so what I've done in the book is I've assembled a kind of game plan that allows you to use questions in very particular ways. So you have a plan of action whenever you encounter any circumstance where you hope to have a spiritual impact. And so I talk about different things, ways to gather information, ways to reverse the burden of proof, but always using questions, just like Lieutenant Columbo. What's interesting about this, David, is when you start using questions like that and kind of adopting a little bit of a Columbo manner, as opposed to the aggressive in your face, have an argument, you're wrong, I'm right, line drawn in the sand, people defending turf. I mean, that's just, look, if anybody gets mad, I lose. If I get mad, I lose. If they get mad, I lose. If anybody gets mad, I lose. So I want to try to avoid making people angry. And that means sidestepping the aggressive confrontational approach and mellowing out a little bit and using questions to maneuver. A lot of aspects to this, and I talk about it in the book, but if our viewers just think conceptually about this, oh yeah, when you ask questions, you're being polite, you're trying to find out somebody else's view. When you're asking questions, you're showing interest in their point of view. When you're asking questions, you're getting more information that might help you to know where to go next. All right. When you're asking questions, you're in the driver's seat of the conversation. All right. This interview is a great example. David, you've asked a few questions, and I'm doing all the talking, right? I'm doing all the work here. You're relaxed. But we're moving in the direction that you've already established because of the questions that you've asked. So in a very real sense, there's no pressure on you. Pressure's on me. But you are still the one that is in the driver's seat of our conversation. And this is what I want for our Christian viewers to do the same thing, to be in the driver's seat of their conversations with other people, but in an amicable manner by using questions to maneuver in those conversations, to gather information, to understand the other person's view. And then when you see a weakness or a flaw that you might be aware of because of some of the other tactics, now you're going to still use a question to try to point that out. I'll give you one example. We were talking about a few months ago, one of the problems of atheism. They do not have a way of grounding morality because they don't believe in morality. Now, I'm not saying that atheists are all awful people. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying that in the context of atheism, almost all atheists are what you call materialists. They believe in the physical world in motion, and that's it. There are no gods, there are no spirits, there are no souls, there are no miracles. These are all part of fantasy land, according to them. All right, fine. So the entire non-physical world doesn't exist on their view. I get it. Hey, they could be right for the sake of discussion. But on that view, you can't have a moral obligation because a moral obligation is not physical. Mm-hmm. And you ought. Who says who? Well, see, that's another part of it. Well, on our view, you have moral obligations because God, who's the king of the universe, says so. All right, if there's no God, then there's no say-so, and therefore there's no moral obligations. But notice, if there are no moral obligations, there can't be a problem of evil. People aren't doing anything wrong. Right. It isn't true that the world is not the way it's supposed to be. In order for the world not to be not the way it's supposed to be, there has to be a way the world's supposed to be, and you can't have a way the world's supposed to be without a sposer. Right. For goodness sake,
you know, relative.
It's all exactly. It's all tied together. I mean, this is not like my opinion. This is the way these things work. All right. If you have no speed limits, you have no broken speed limits. Period. If you have no government, you have no speed limits, and therefore you have no broken speed limits, right? So if you're saying on the universal basis or whatever, there is no God, there are no universal speed limits, and there are no broken speed limits. There's no problem of evil. Okay, so now that's just the foundation of it, all right? Now I know this. Most atheists haven't thought this through, quite frankly, and they are very quick, even thoughtful atheists are quick sometimes to judge others morally for things that they've done, even though in their system they have no foundation for that. So now you've got the idea. Now, how does that work out tactically? So if a Richard Dawkins, for example, claims that there is no good and no evil, which he does in some of his writings, which is consistent with his atheism, but then in another, the God delusion, he attacks the God of the Bible essentially for being immoral. He has a whole paragraph of, of superlatives where he goes, it's actually really well written, He's a homophobic, genocidal, sadomasochistic, all of this stuff he's going on and on. Yeah, and hey, it's a good writing, but it's not thoughtful writing. Because, wait a minute, you're an atheist, right? Yeah. Okay, so tell me. And now here's the tactical maneuver. Notice I have an insight. You can't make a moral judgment against God from inside of your system. You have no grounds for that. All right. You don't believe in that kind of stuff if you take your system, atheism, seriously. So now I know that. So now I got a question. I could point it out that it's not shrewd. Instead, use a question that's shrewder. Jesus said, be shrewd, right? So what I'm going to say is, Professor Dawkins, where are you getting your standard of morality that you are using to judge God right now? See that silence? That's the sound of silence, right? That's what you get. Because there's no place to get the standard of morality by which he's judging God. When atheist, Richard Dawkins makes statements like that, he's not talking like an atheist. He's talking like a theist. Now, I don't think his assessment is sound, but talking morally like that is consistent with theism. It's not consistent with atheism. Now, they have only one way out. One way out, and that is evolution. Okay, so my evolution has taught me about right and wrong, and God is doing things that are wrong according to my evolution. Well, now I'm explaining it out in more crisp terms. It's already starting to sound ridiculous. And on my own radio show, I said to an atheist, so what you're saying is, what you see God doing in the Bible is not consistent with your personal evolution. Is that right? And he said, yes. And I said, well, I rest my case. Because you can see how this is silly. Just because you evolved one set of standards doesn't mean another person evolved those same. And why does your evolved subjective set of standards have anything to do with whether God's good or bad or not? It's silly. Mm-hmm. But notice how I was able to maneuver there by using questions. And if you ask the right question in a fair way, you get your sounds of silence. You get that moment where they don't have a place to go. And I'm not trying to make people look foolish. It's not like a gotcha. My goal isn't like a victory. Okay, my goal is to get them to think this isn't going to work for you. So you got a choice. You can accept morality and attack God, but you'd have to do that from some kind of theistic foundation, and that's contradictory. Or you can stay an atheist and be silent in regards to not only God's morality, but anybody's morality,
right?
If you want to be consistent. So anyway, that's how that works out. The tactical approach in a very particular circumstance.
Yeah, I'm actually I have to get that book because I love Socratic questioning. Jesus asked the greatest questions,
yeah.
And it was, and I think that it's a lost art, discussing philosophy based on your view of reality and your epistemological data, and just being able to have these conversations. So I believe that what the world should be are people who meet each other, who have different philosophies, being able to have open conversations, being able to ask the right questions. And even if you don't get to the same conclusion as the other person, you could respect the thought process.
That's right.
And we've lost that in our world today.
Yeah. Well, it's rapidly being chipped away. We're losing the liberty to have those kinds of discussions. And what's so unfortunate is that the liberty to do that is not the summum bonum. It's not the greatest good. It is the acquiring of what is true about the world that's the greatest good, because that's what has the ramifications. But in practical terms, if you do not have that liberty, which has been a liberty that's been characteristic of the American experiment for over 200 years. I mean, we have the Liberty Bell, for goodness sake, right? In Philadelphia, we've got the and on it, by the way, is a Bible verse from Deuteronomy that says, "Let liberty ring throughout the land." So we have a history of that, and broad-based liberty is the foundational necessity that allows us to be able to get to that most important thing, the truth about the most important things, the big capital T truth about things. And if we don't have liberty, then we are not going to be able to have access to the information or the reasons why people should understand the way the world really is, and to see how there may be endangered, if and certainly are, they're at risk if what Jesus says about the world is true. If what the story we find in the ancient Hebrew prophets and the person of Jesus and those people who Jesus trained to follow after him, if that coherent story, if that's true, well, then it does have ramifications for everybody. And it's the most important thing that anyone could ever know. But without liberty, there's no freedom to proclaim it, which I think is why in 1 Timothy chapter 2, Paul says we should be praying for our leaders so that we can live a life in dignity, and peacefulness, because it's in that kind of environment that the gospel can increase and advance and be considered by others who desperately need it.
Well, it's conversations like this. It's being able to have the freedom and liberty to have these conversations, to share them with other people, and share these thoughts and ideas with this community today. I appreciate you being here today. This conversation probably can go on, and so I appreciate you taking the time to spend with our community, strengthening our understanding and our confidence, and even giving us tools to be able to go out and share that, ask the right questions with people. You're absolutely, you're a silent mentor of mine already. Like I said, before I started seminary, I watched Christ Revealed. And Patrick even said, you may even get a better education than seminary. I'll tell you what, it was a great springboard. Appreciate you so much for coming here today and spending the time and spending it with our community.
Well, you're so welcome. It's a great community, and I'm glad to have a bully pulpit here again. And anytime you want to chat, just let me know, Dave.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. Have a great day.